Elaborate a little more, if you would, when you talk about useful idiots. What are we talking about here?
We're talking about people that are ripe for manipulation and influence. People that take on partners or take on positions out of mostly opportunism. And because of that opportunism, a Russian strategy can actually place people, aides, advisors, and policy positions around those individuals such that they unwittingly start doing Russia's business for them. And that's a very dangerous thing in a political context, and that's how you can slowly manipulate foreign policy, if you're Russia, inside the United States. You take these people, you provide them what they need to move forward, and you let them basically run with the football for you over into the end zone.
So Clint, let's pull that string a little more there. Unwittingly use people. How do you unwittingly use someone? What would the tactics be? Can you give us an example?
Yeah, WikiLeaks is an excellent example. You put out information, selected information, that tarnishes one party or political group versus another. You do that through hacking. And what you do then is you line that information up, you release it, and you're the first to pounce on it. So the Russians, knowing what secrets have been stolen, are the first ones that can then publish news stories on it. They can then lead other mainstream media outlets and even political candidates with nuclear bombs, essentially, little information nukes that they can launch against their opponents. And this is a strategy they used back in the Cold War under the Soviet era, and they still use today in the Russian context.
Ambassador Hill, let me ask you, as the former ambassador to South Korea, about some of the comments made last night in that Reuters interview by President Trump in regards to South Korea, in regards to North Korea. Although he said he obviously prefers diplomacy, he prefers working with the Chinese, he said there is always the potential for what he called a major conflict. What are the implications of words like that coming out of the White House?
Well, I think what the president is doing is saying, look, that he's making this a top priority. He's not sure where it's going to go. He's ready for anything. I mean, the most astounding thing he said in that interview was the idea that somehow expressing some sympathy or maybe even empathy for Kim Jong-un, saying, well, you know, he's only 27. He inherited this from his father. You know, it's tough, etc. So I think what he's doing is, you know, he's all over the map, but with one very clear focus. He wants to see if he can get to the point where they can persuade North Korea to give up these nuclear weapons. A tall order, and he's certainly full of flattery for the Chinese to try to recruit them and make sure they're with him. So, you know, we'll have to see how this plays out.
How do you think he's going about this as compared to President Obama or President Bush or the many presidents who've tried to get at this North Korea problem through China? What do you make of the approach of this White House?
I think with respect to China, he's trying to put everything on the table. It's not just some careful diplomatic minuet. He's putting everything on the table. He's even said, well, I can't go after them as currency manipulators as long as they're helping on North Korea. So I think there's an all-in and very focused approach with the Chinese to the effect that everything else is irrelevant. We're going to deal with North Korea. That's a little different because often when previous administrations would go to the Chinese, they'd have a whole Christmas tree of lists. I mean, you name it, you know, Uyghur rights, Tibet issues, all kinds of things. And he seems to be singularly focused on North Korea. Frankly, I don't think it's a bad approach at all. But of course, we have to see if it's going to yield any results, because the North Koreans have shown absolutely no interest in living up to their previous obligations to give up their nuclear weapons.
Ambassador, good morning. Harold Ford. Building on those comments, how does this approach regarding North Korea and China, how does it impact this president and White House's ability to deal with trade issues, ones that he raised during the campaign and has raised since being elected? And two, you indicated you are pleased with some of the things they're doing right now. What would you be doing differently, or what would you be advising differently if you were in the administration today?
Well, it's not so much differently, but what I would suggest, however, is to be very careful about the situation in South Korea. It's a very volatile country right now. They have their president having been impeached and sitting in a jail cell awaiting trial. They have an election coming up on May 9th. So and that election will be interesting. I mean, there's one of the leading candidates is a kind of, you know, not, I wouldn't say anti-American, but certainly a lot less sympathetic diplomatic to us than the previous administration. So he's got to be very careful about that, and he doesn't want to create a situation when in this sort of effort to work with the Chinese, there's a perception in the South Korean public that he's going over the heads of the South Koreans. He doesn't really care what they think. He's going right to the situation with China, and he also needs to keep track of Japan. But I think it's basically the right approach. Once let's say he gets there, which would again be an extraordinary development. Yes, I don't think it would be a good idea to then pivot and say, now we'd like to talk again about your being a currency manipulator. So we would be in a whole new world with China.
Clint, it's Catty here in Washington. A couple of questions on the kind of intelligence side of this. We saw that huge live fire drill that the North Koreans put on the big display of all their tanks on the beach earlier this week. You know, how good is our intelligence on what they have, what they don't have, on the conventional side, on the conventional weapons side, and then on the intelligence side, on terms of the sanctions and what the Chinese might actually be doing to enforce those sanctions? How quickly will we be able to see that?
Yeah, I think
Well,
in terms
first of all,
Clint, go ahead.
Clint, go ahead.
So I think in terms of intelligence, that's what I can talk to. I think we have really good intelligence in terms of the technical collection platforms, but where we're always going to be weak in North Korea is with human intelligence. We really don't understand or oftentimes know how they're thinking about problems and what their decision-making processes are.
Yeah, I mean, I almost had people saying to me about those photos that we saw out of North Korea last week. How do we even know this is real? I mean, you know, are these tanks all lined up there? Are they actually real tanks?
Exactly. We see those pictures, we see those images. They're known to do the Potemkin Village strategy, where they actually build up locations or build up mock-ups. So if there's technical signatures, what we call measurements and signatures intelligence, we do very well. The key part that we don't understand and we're always shocked about is when there's a change in foreign policy position by Kim Jong-un, when he kills one of his own inner circle or when he assassinates somebody outside of the country. We don't have real good insight on that human intelligence, and that's because it's a very closed-off country.
Ambassador Hill, let me ask you about that enforcement of sanctions bit. How quickly would you expect to see something on that?
I think the Chinese are doing more than they've done before. We have to see how they're doing with trying to close off their financial sector to the North Koreans. That's going to take a while to see whether it happens. The problem, though, with sanctions at this point is it's a much slower train than the North Korean nuclearization train. I mean, North Korea is moving very fast to test this new generation of missiles, to have a nuclear warhead that can be fitted on a missile. They've got a ways to go, but they clearly are working very hard on that. And as with other countries that have gone this route, the response to sanctions is, look, we'll let our people eat grass if that's what it takes. We're going to go forward with this. So I think the problem with sanctions, it may be a little too little and too late, and what we need is much more sort of direct pressure on the North Korean regime to understand that this is not the way to preserve it if they continue on this course.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.